Emergency video. We got breaking news for you as of this morning. The Supreme Court has struck down. They have banned affirmative action, which of course means that going forward, race can no longer be used as a considering factor in college admissions, right? It can't matter one way or the other in your application. And that is obviously a huge win for equality and fairness because, as I'm sure you're familiar with, affirmative action was being used to heavily discriminate against white and Asian students. We'll show you how bad that was here in a second, but it was being used to heavily discriminate. Liberals were, of course, arguing that this discrimination was actually necessary for the sake of equality, right? Which is probably one of the most ridiculous and silly arguments I have ever heard. Actually, we need to lower the bar for Hispanics and blacks and make it easier for them to get into school while simultaneously making it harder for whites and Asians to get into school for no other reason other than race, right? We're going to discriminate against whites and Asians, but actually that's fair because equality. It's always been a ridiculous argument. It's always been silly. It's active discrimination, and that's all it has ever been. And we'll talk about the liberal cope and respond more to their arguments here in a second. But first of all, I want to show you just how bad affirmative action got and what this system was doing, right? So we take a look here at Harvard, which is one of the universities who is being sued in this court case. And as you may be familiar with, there's been that huge Harvard admissions fight. The Asian kids actually tried to sue Harvard, I believe, a few years ago. But check it out. Here is the byproduct of Harvard's affirmative action policies. Here's just how bad it was getting. You may think, okay, Vince, you're exaggerating. They might lower the bar for black students like 1% to 2%, but is it really that bad? Is it really making that much of a difference? Well, as Greg Price here reports, take a look here. An African-American student at Harvard in the 40th percentile of their academic index is more likely to get in than an Asian student in the 100th percentile. So what does that mean for statistics, people? Well, essentially, an Asian student who is in the top 1% of grades and test scores was less likely to get into Harvard than a black student in the bottom 60%. That is exactly what that means. The bottom 60% was more likely than the top 1% if you were Asian, okay? Like, this is just beyond mind-blowing. It is boggling, to say the least. And then in comparison to white students, right, black students in the 50th percentile were more likely to get in than a white student. So I don't know the exact, what is the 40th percentile on the SAT, but I'd have to imagine it's pretty freaking low. How much would that be? Like a 900 or something? A 900, 1000? Don't quote me on that. But we're talking about very low SAT scores. You're genuinely academically subpar. That's probably about a B minus to a C, maybe even a D student who would score in the 40th percentile on the SAT. And that was more likely to get into Harvard, right, than the Asian student with 1600 SAT or 1500 plus, A plus, 4.0 GPA, all of that, okay? And this goes far beyond even what the liberals were arguing, which is that, well, maybe we should make it a little bit easier because, some black students are disadvantaged, which is still a silly argument in itself, and we'll address it here in a second. But regardless, we're not talking about that. We are talking about genuinely academically poor, downright stupid kids were being admitted to Harvard simply because they were black, whereas Asian kids, white kids who were actually smart, who were actually working hard and in the top 1% of students in this Ivy League admissions process, were getting denied for the sake of black students. And they said this was fair. They said this was necessary. Well, the Supreme Court has rejected those arguments for the precise reason that they are ridiculous, they are silly, they're also pretty blatant violations of civil rights law. And so we move on further here. But let's talk about the liberal cope, the liberal seethe in reaction to all of this. So we take a look at how the New York Times is framing the situation. Breaking news: the Supreme Court rejected affirmative action at Harvard and the University of North Carolina. This major ruling curtails race-conscious college admissions in the U.S., which, this is what they say, all but ensuring that elite institutions become whiter and more Asian and less black and Latino. And this is, of course, their complaint. They say, oh, well, it's going to be all white and Asians and no blacks and Latinos in the colleges. Now, I will say, as bad faith and as disingenuous as they are trying to be, there's actually nothing wrong in that statement. And that's what I will say about this is that, listen, now that the process is actually fair and equal, now that these same equal standards are being applied to everyone, and you cannot make the excuses of race this, race that, genuinely, that is what you are going to see. It's true. You are going, now that the system is fair and balanced, you are going to see results that do not line up with certain social narratives. That's what I will say about it. Okay, so it will be interesting to see, and they actually are right about that. I look at that and say, well, if the same standards are being applied to everyone, then they're being applied to everyone. And then when you look at, the fact that certain races on average score higher and lower in terms of, their academic performances currently as it stands in schools, then yeah, that is what you will see. And I'm sorry if that doesn't line up with your social narrative, fine. I prefer actual fairness and actual justice over nonsense narratives, but it is true. All right, we move on now finally here in this video to the liberal dissent. Okay, so if you read the dissent in this case from Ketanji Brown Jackson, I mean, you can read it here on your screen, but it's completely nonsense. It's completely ridiculous. She basically just makes the CRT 1619 argument that, well, but past discrimination, past inequalities mean that now we have to do the reverse in order to make it fair to blacks and Latinos. Forget the Asians, because, it's not like Asians were ever discriminated against in this stuff. But, I don't know why now today they're, the most socioeconomically successful racial group in America. Forget that. No, discrimination, blah, blah, blah. What's very interesting, though, is that when you read this dissent here, notice how you don't see a single legal or constitutional argument. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, right? All she goes out there and basically says is, well, read it for yourself. No one benefits from ignorance. Race still matters to the lived experiences of all Americans in innumerable ways, and today's ruling makes things worse. Okay, if you want to write that in a New York Times op-ed, then maybe I would understand that. But this is a Supreme Court justices, the Biden-appointed Supreme Court justices' arguments, and there are no arguments. What laws? No one benefits from ignorance? What does that have to do with the law? What does that have to do with Constitution or precedents or any of that stuff? None of it is named. Because, by the way, she can't justify it. No one can justify it. Affirmative action itself, as it currently exists, is in blatant violation of civil rights law, right? So all they run to is, well, this is ignorant. This is CRT, all this stuff. It is ridiculous, okay? And it goes to show, of course, she is an activist judge. But you know what is also so ridiculous about her argument? Her essential argument that, well, the disparities you see today are the result of past discrimination, which I would argue is, of course, not true, right? They always talk about this generational wealth argument, but it's totally wrong, because generational wealth only lasts on average about 3 generations, right? After 3 generations, unless you build upon your wealth, whatever wealth that, your grandfather had is going to totally dissipate. But even if we do want to entertain this whole generational wealth argument, which of course, again, is actually not true, it is incorrect, but still, let's just take it at face value, right? Even if this argument is true, it still doesn't make sense, because the ruling does not ban socioeconomic factors from being used in consideration, right? So if the argument is, oh, well, that kid was poor, so he didn't have the same resources in school growing up as the rich kid who could get the tutors and the help and the private education and all that. Okay, fine, fair enough. This ruling does not ban that. Right? So if you want to say this black kid is poor because of past discrimination, well, the fact that he is poor, the fact that he did not have the same opportunities growing up is still used in consideration, right? But your problem with it, of course, is that precisely this, right? They do want to make it a racial thing, because the poor white kid who grew up in the same exact socioeconomic circumstances, arguably, right? Now it's actually fair to that kid, but they don't want to make it fair to that kid, right? And as compared to the rich Nigerian kid whose parents just immigrated here and he's never faced any discrimination, right? But you want to give him favoritism. And what is that about? Well, again, it is about they want to actively discriminate, of course, against whites, against Asians, in favor of mainly black kids and Hispanic kids, right? That's what it's all about. Again, the argument is silly. You see how that argument is silly? Oh, they're poor. Oh, disparities. Well, actually, it makes more sense to go off of socioeconomics, right? Because there's plenty of affluent, middle class, wealthier black people out there, Hispanic people out there. What institutional barrier exists to them? The only argument along these lines where you could say socioeconomic factors being used for consideration is not enough is if you are basically arguing in some way that black and Hispanic kids are inherently worse academically and inherently worse at school in a way that somehow transcends socioeconomic circumstances and political attitudes. Do you understand? That is what you are arguing, right? Because again, if it's all just socioeconomics and opportunity, fine. The ruling does not get rid of that, right? The ruling does not get rid of that consideration. The only thing that the only consideration they're getting rid of is that very direct race, right? The color of your skin. So is the liberal I'm asking a genuine question, right? Is the liberal argument here that that's unfair because black and Hispanic kids are inherently worse at school? Is that the argument you were making? I'm serious. Your words, not mine, right? Because that is the only logic by which you could justify socioeconomic considerations, hey, economic disparities, not being considered enough in this consideration, right? It is nonsense. It is absolutely ridiculous. But with that said, let them seethe, let them cope, because everyone is winning now. Equality, fairness, justice, it is all winning. So, yeah. All right, with that said, ladies and gentlemen, we will, of course, talk about this more tonight on the show. Just wanted to get this emergency video out there for you. So be sure to join us as usual live tonight on the Vince Dao Show at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We will more specifically be reacting to liberal Vince Dao, right? My liberal doppelganger, Victor Shi, he, as you can imagine, is actually very angry about this decision. And I'm actually going to explain tonight why he and every other, frankly, Asian, and for that matter, white kid out there who supports affirmative action is a genuine race traitor. So we'll be talking about that tonight. It'll be a spicy, fun segment. But yeah, join us tonight. Be sure to leave a like on the stream before you go. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Consider sending in a super thanks or joining the channel membership to support the channel and gain access to exclusive perks. And until next time, Alpha moves only. God bless. Have a very good day, great day, and peace. Hey guys, Vince Dao here. Hope you enjoyed that clip from the Vince Dao Show. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you are new to the channel. And be sure to check out the Vince Dao Show live every weeknight here on this channel at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It is a great show. Many are saying this. So leave a like, check out our other clips, and be sure to check out the show. Yeah. God bless.